Lupton.
Right. Good morning, friends. This morning we have Hattie talking about being a GP in retirement. So, Hattie, over to you when you're ready.
Okay, hello, morning. I was a GP in Runcorn in Cheshire.
Hello.
And then I took a year off and did an A-level in music and Patsy, half a diploma in counselling. And then I joined a practice in South Bristol. And that's where I was for 18 years until 2012, June 2012, when I was 60 and I retired. A couple of years before that, I'd had a head injury, and the head injury, it kind of affected me. They allowed me back to work after a month. And I thought nothing more of it and carried on. Hello, Brett. And I can't hear you yet, but you're there. And carried on, knowing I was going to retire at 60. So I had a couple of years after the head injury practicing, and that was good. What I sort of thought I'd highlight to you is some of the changes that have happened during my GP career, which was from my mid-20s to 60. So, I mean, it was 35 years, and just highlighting some of the changes that have happened, and that probably will raise some questions later on because you will have noticed them as well in your experience. So one of the things was the night visits. So we used to do our own night visits, and that meant that our patients thought twice about calling us if they needed, and they really needed. And that was fine because, in fact, we rarely got more than 3 calls during a night. Sometimes we didn't get any, which was lovely. And they were our patients, and we could either know them because they were my personal patients, or we would have access to their notes if we went down to the practice to pick the paper notes up. And then things changed so that the government decided that it would be quite a good idea to cover each other at night, since you were disturbed so little and you got paid a night visit fee for each visit. So what the government decided to do was look at the finances, yes, together with a GP advisor, if not more, and decided that it would be to the benefit of people to to give GPs a sort of pot of money that they could use for night visits. So I think it was £2,000 or £3,000 for the year. And that meant that you could spend that money how you wanted. So a lot of GPs decided to club together, either in small groups or a large group, gradually developed, and do each other's visits. So you might be up all night and then take the next morning off work or something like that to do everybody in that group's visits. And then, as you know, things gradually developed so that some GPs were quite entrepreneurial and began their own businesses. So we've got in Bristol, we had Brisdoc in the south of Bristol, and we had Friendoc up in the north of Bristol, for Frenchay area, and South Gloss, and others developed nearby. And I was part of the very first idea of joining into a small group. So there were half a dozen of us from different practices who decided to give it a go and arranged things so that we could see each other's patients. But we didn't have access to the other GP's notes, of course. But that was quite interesting, and it highlighted the problems that you needed to solve if you were going to have more of a big business. And now you get a business employed doctor attending you at night. They won't. They probably do have access to your basic NHS notes now. It's taken years, over 30 years, to sort out the access to patients' records because there were so many different computer systems, and it was really difficult to get them to talk to each other, and the confidentiality issues. I mean, the NHS, you could call it wasted if you like, but spent millions of pounds and lots of employees trying to sort out these computer talking problems. But now, for instance, I went to casualty with somebody this weekend, and the GP was looking at records from the nurses in his practice and from the doctors in his practice, and she could see the development of the history of how he got to that point in time. And it was really interesting how little kind of basic work you had to do. You didn't have to say to the patient, how long has this been going on? What's it been like? Well, I mean, obviously you would in certain cases, but this particular thing had been logged in the GP's record so that she could see how long it had been going on for and how it had got worse. So it really, our connectivity is really, really different than it was. And that so-called helps doctors who never met you before to see who you are and how you are. But of course, you don't know them from Adam. And so your kind of social communication hasn't begun until you clap eyes on them. And then the next time it might be a different doctor anyway. So I still value personal care, and I always have. And I think that's been my teaching ever since. So then the other thing that changed over these last 20, 30 years was the introduction of GP appraisals. So when I started practice, actually when I was training for practice, general practice was still an undervalued speciality. And a lot of people thought, well, when I finished my training, I'll just go and be a GP for a bit before getting into my speciality. And being a GP for a bit meant that you thought you didn't have to do any GP training. It wasn't regarded as a speciality until I think in the 80s, then you had to start having a qualification in general practice. And now you absolutely have to have a qualification in general practice before you go in. So my qualification in general practice started when I was in hospital and I decided to become a GP. And I had to look at the jobs that I'd already done and did they contribute to the GP kind of needed training. And I found I had to do an extra 6 months because that was pediatrics and I hadn't done any. And then I had to have the year's attachment in general practice. So the speciality of general practice really grew in the 70s and 80s. And the Royal College of GPs has been going longer than that. And they champion assessments and appraisals. Now, the appraisal process was extremely thorough. And every year you had to collect all sorts of data about yourself, how many hours study you'd done independently or on courses. You had to do some surveys or studies in your practice to see what was happening. You had to log all the different aspects of your training and of your work during the year. So for instance, if I was the executive partner one year, I had to log the sort of things that I'd been doing for that and rate the successes and the failures and, you know, have a look at everything. Now, I hated the process of this data gathering, absolutely loathed it. And other GPs I've spoken to have too. What I loved was the hours, perhaps 2 hours with the appraiser. And there you were chatting through what it's like being a GP and she would be having a look at or he would be having a look at what your GP appraisal statistics and figures said, but you'd be sharing the experience of being a GP, and I really did enjoy that very much. So, but I hated the preparation for it. So that really was actually quite prime mover for me leaving. I love being a GP, as you know. Now, about maternity. When I first started in general practice, you had to have the experience and to apply to be on the maternity list. That meant that you were allowed to see patients during their pregnancies and attend them during their births at home. And gradually, as the midwives got more, I guess, numerous and more experienced and qualified, that took over. So the midwives, the first thing was that we stopped being allowed to attend births. And then the second thing was the midwives did all the antenatal care. And it was really lovely working in South Bristol because only, I think, two or three buildings, well, 10 buildings down the road, there was the building where the midwives were working. So actually we used to go and do our midwifery, our antenatal care there alongside the midwives. And that was very nice. But that stopped after some years. So really maternity is taken care of by midwives now, and the hospital doctors and services provided by the specialised ambulances for transferring newborn babies and for transferring mums in labour into hospital care urgently if they need that. So these national shifts played out locally. Health visitors, sadly enough, health visitors seem to have declined in numbers. And one practice where I was working, in fact, the practice where I was training as a GP, we never saw the health visitor. There was a communications book, and I reckon she popped in to have a look and see if there was anything in it by chance every 2 or 3 weeks. We never had formal meetings with her. We never had feedback about how children were developing and stuff like that. I don't know how that ever happened, because I think the health visitor's job can be incredibly important for spotting delays in development, helping parents with minor ailments and skin conditions and stuff like that, that they can feel confident to manage themselves then. There's a lot to learn being a mum. Minor surgery. Well, we used to do small operations for our patients, and at first we never got paid for it. It's just a delight really to have a different skill and to remove warts and particular growths or moles and stuff like that. It was great. It was lovely practical fun. I really liked doing 3D stuff for my patients, and they were very chuffed when the little brown dot somewhere was removed or a lump. Anyhow, then it became formalized, and this was about the same time as a lot of other things became formalized, like GP diabetes care and asthma care, and monitored, and you had to do a certain percentage, and you had to know how many patients on your list were asthmatic or had diabetes or learning difficulties and were on lithium medication, which needs close monitoring. So minor surgery became formalized and regulated, and really the first person who took over the minor surgery in our practice had been a surgeon in the past, and that was quite obvious. And so he did that, and then one of the other doctors joined in. So between them, they did the minor surgery bits, and I really love minor surgery. So I said, can't I have a go? Anyhow, I hadn't done any minor surgery for years, probably, I don't know, 15 or something years. And the first comment they said was, "You're too slow." I said, "Well, I'm just learning again, aren't I?" Anyway, after 2 or 3 sessions, they just decided that I was too slow and hesitant and all the rest of it. It was like I was learning it again, really. Anyhow, and also learning how the nurses worked and where things were stored, and pass me this, that, and the other. But so I don't know whether I'm pleased that minor surgery has been so regulated. What it did do, in order to have minor surgery paid for by the government, you absolutely had to have things extremely clean, extremely cleanable. So, you'd have an inspection of the clinical area, and it was passed if it was easy to clean lino floors and surfaces which wipe down very easily, uncluttered spaces and places to store things. So it was much more thorough, I would say. Then we had clinics for chronic diseases developed. And, the question is whether that is better to have a formalized list of things you had to tick that you had done for your patients with certain conditions, or whether it was better to have an individual service where your own doctor saw you for everything, and then referred you to the practice nurse if they needed something, dressings or blood tests or various tests done. However, this mostly now you will be invited to go to see a nurse practitioner who is specializing in these specific diseases, and you will have a review every 6 months or a year, whatever is called for by this protocol. And this is all funded by the government. Now, it's not necessarily extra to our pay. Certain pay was taken away and then given back to you if you did the clinics. So I really liked the chronic disease clinics because it made me look at the practice list. By that time, we could do computer searches, just like that. So I could find out how many patients of ours had diabetes, and all our teaching was 1% of the population was diabetic. No, we had 3%, just over 3% of our patients who were having diabetes. And so we had to flag this up and say, no, life's not like that in South Bristol. Anybody else getting the same results? Yes. So diabetes was loads more common than people thought. There were loads of people who had not been treated, highlighted, looked after properly, because their diabetes just wasn't kind of cottoned on to. They weren't formally followed up. Now, people are formally followed up. So people who have been diabetic in the past and are not now, generally speaking, I can't be 100%, but generally speaking, they are asked to go for reviews in case they become diabetic again, which quite often happens. And that needs care and looking after. Other chronic diseases, I think, quite important, well, very importantly, people who are on lithium medication for bipolar disorder, mental health, it was very random if they kept their records to make sure that they got a blood test every 6 months or so, or every 3 months if necessary. And now it's much more formalized. So the computer will throw up, this person hasn't had a blood test for so long, and it will remind you. And that means that you need a certain person who's responsible for that clinic and making sure that the patients have got messages and are going to get their blood test done. And if they can't, we go there and do it. Because if you have too much lithium in your system, and it doesn't just depend on what you take, it can depend on other conditions that you've got, or dehydration or hot weather. So unless it's looked after, it can damage kidneys. Well, that's quite a chronic illness, and you don't really want to be landed with that. And also, one of the other clinics that developed was for people with learning difficulties, and they're often left out of medical care very badly as well. And their carers suffer incredibly stressful things, and they've got a huge demand on their life if they've got to look after somebody who's got learning difficulties. Finally, they got some kind of recognition. They got some kind of understanding that these people needed to have medical checkups as well. And we could refer them on to various resources that might be useful to them. So I actually think that introducing these clinics for chronic care, even though you didn't have the same doctor looking after all your medical needs, I think the clinics were useful. And certainly, though they've been criticised, and they've highlighted how bad diabetes care has been, for instance, in some places, it would not have been highlighted, I don't think, except Brett might have told the individual people and tried to explain how some diabetes care offered is pretty inappropriate sometimes. Then our prescribing was monitored. Well, you should have seen the hoo-ha amongst the GPs in Bristol when their prescribing was going to be monitored. They thought they were sacrosanct and they knew what their patients needed and what to prescribe. Of course, drug companies used to give us meals and sponsor talks and sometimes little trips. And I can't say I was immune to it. I didn't do much because I didn't truly believe that it was a good idea for drug companies to be paying for nice little jollies. However, what this did was supposedly, in quotes, improve our prescribing. Well, the drug companies would improve their figures by giving us meals and introducing us to what they're producing, getting us to prescribe things. However, when we had a look at the price, the difference between spending on medication between practices in Bristol, I mean, it was just phenomenal. Nobody believed it, that one practice would be prescribing loads of this expensive antibiotic. Why? You don't need it. You just go for the cheap and cheerful, for goodness sake, or why prescribe this and that and the other? And the arguments were incredible, and it was very difficult to decide how to kind of narrow the difference down between the prices of our prescribing and try to get it more even and more rational. So the effort that went into that was huge. I was prescribing lead in our practice, and then we started employing a clinical pharmacist. He had been on a training course over 3 years, I think, and he was able to prescribe a certain list of medications. So we paid part of his salary, and other practices paid part of his salary other places. So he was effectively employed by the primary care trust at the time, and divided his time with different practices and improved our prescribing habits. And he knew about interactions, so he could, contact one of us and say, look, this hasn't been reviewed, or, do you realize that putting those together might do something or other, or you don't have to use that dose, you can use this dose. Lots of good suggestions. So lots of teaching was going on to individual GPs, because we felt that probably was going to be one of the good ways of improving how people prescribed, because there's nobody there sitting on your shoulder like Jiminy Cricket saying, no, you can't prescribe this. And gradually that did develop. So now there are prescribing lists, there's OK lists, and if you want to prescribe X, you might well have to go and ask permission to prescribe it. If it's an expensive drug, or it's a risky drug to prescribe in general practice, you might well have to go and ask permission to a GP prescribing group to prescribe that. So now we have kind of formularies for the nurses, what they can prescribe, and formularies for pharmacists, optometrists, ophthalmic opticians, and for GPs. So there's different lists. I thought that was quite okay. I think I'd been introduced to the idea years ago when I did a medical student attachment in South Africa, where there were certain drugs available, and that's all that was available. And the idea was to try to get enough drugs to cover nearly all emergencies. So then I think another thing that happened because of all this change, other reasons as well maybe, I think we did tend to work together more. So, yes, well, except for midwifery, of course, which became completely separated. But I think the GPs groups had to work together more, because they were all working, for instance, on prescribing, or all working on blood pressure, and so you would meet as you'd have prescribing meetings with groups of GPs, and you'd discuss how we're getting on and what's happening. And then there were the national figures that were coming out about how good blood pressure was controlled. I mean, for instance, today the news includes a feature saying how many million people have missed out on starting blood pressure tablets because of the pandemic. I mean, I don't think they'd have that unless there was good GP figures being analysed and being used. And we had to go through the process of ensuring that all the patients agreed to have their medical data shared. I mean, they were not going to be sharing their name and address, but we had to get this consent for them to have their medical information shared. And that was a real hassle. And some patients really hated it, and they thought that it was an invasion of their privacy. Why should their medical data be shared? But in fact, that's the way to get national data. And I think it's useful. It's anonymized. All this about finances and funding and lists and things involved more management. So some GPs had to be leads in these topics. And so even though we hadn't had management training as GPs, you had to become more management savvy, as it were. So you would look for little courses, or you would have away days with the practice manager and the GPs to try and sort of make management type decisions. And in our practice, we decided to have an executive partner, and each couple of years we rotated amongst ourselves. I was the first executive partner in Malago, and then I became executive partner again when everyone else has had their turn. And I quite enjoyed it. One of the first things I did was say, why have we got the heating on at the weekends? You know, what are we doing paying for all that? We don't need it. So that, you know, little actions like that. And then after I left, jumping back to this head injury malarkey, after I left, I got a slap up payment from the court in compensation for my head injury. And I thought, well, I'm still here. I'm still alive. I'm okay. So I put that back to the practice, actually, and put up solar panels on the practice. So I was chuffed with that. I thought that was good use of the money, the payout money. What else then? So these are some of the ways that general practice had changed. Another nice thing I liked about general practice, we nearly all had outside interests. I think the people who didn't do what I call an outside interest, outside medical interest, were people who had children, and that was, it's a commitment to have children. It's quite big in terms of hours and stuff like that. And so that was always respected. But quite a few of us had other interests. So when I was working in Runcorn in Cheshire, for instance, I was on the alcohol team, and then I was in the diabetic clinic for some years. And another thing that I did was join Aguda, which doesn't exist anymore, but it was the Association of General Practice in Urban Deprived Areas. And of course, 60s, 70s, 80s, there were deprived areas. There really was deprivation. And so I joined that when I came to Runcorn. Some parts of Runcorn in Cheshire, even though it's a new town, were really pretty deprived, actually. Yeah. So, and one year I did lots of locums between training and becoming a GP in Runcorn. I mean, I think I had to apply for about 40 jobs before I found one that I wanted and that they wanted me. And so during that time, I was doing locums, and I quite enjoyed it. But that's another set of skills that you have to develop. So I had an A to Z address book, and if I went to work at Pill, I'd look under P for Pill when I went to work there again, and I'd revise how they worked and the names of their receptionists and things. And I walked in, I said, "Oh, hello, Joanne. How are things? Yeah, what's your cat like these days?" You know, so actually that kind of skill, which you never needed if you were a regular in your GP surgery. And so I did a talk called Bridging the Gap, because usually locum doctors are employed when other doctors are off on leave or study leave or sick or something. So you're bridging the gap in their practice. So that was my little talk there. The other thing I did, very interesting, was forensics. I did what's called a Fagin course, forensic academics in the north. So I was working sort of in Runcorn near Liverpool, and there was a good course there, and I became an on-call police surgeon for Cheshire. And occasionally had to be called out in the middle of the night. I mean, you could turn it down if you wanted to, but it was very interesting work. And I let the other doctors in my practice know what I was up to. There was only one night that I was called out, and I had to go to Macclesfield from Runcorn. I mean, it's just miles. But that was great. Being there as a woman, being rare for rape cases or children who had been abused or bruised, and collecting the evidence and stuff like that. I found that course very, very interesting. And then after I'd finished doing that, then I became St John's Ambulance Divisional Surgeon. And in Runcorn, somebody set up a new branch of St John's Ambulance, which was lovely. Of course, we attended all the fetes, and we trained each other. The joke was, when I was given a little testing, little exam on the St John's, and of course, being a doctor is very different from being a first aider. So they failed me as a first aider the first time. I just didn't know enough about being a first aider. You can read the book, it's not the same as actually having it in front of you. So that was a good fun experience. And we even went and saw Michael Jackson at Aintree Racecourse. So we were part of the St John's team at that. And I can tell you, a lot of people got ill. And the commonest thing was they couldn't walk home afterwards because they'd been standing for hours and the muscles were absolutely not used to it, and their legs were agony and dropping off, so they couldn't walk home. And we just had people sitting around at the end of the concert because they could not get themselves moving. They were in too much pain. So here, have 2 paracetamol and wait. So that was a good lot of fun there. What about family planning during this time? Because I did family planning training ages ago, and I felt that it was a very good thing for a GP to know about, or to have family planning in their armamentarium. So I joined Avon Cash Group, which was contraception and sexual health group. And we were quite keen that it wasn't just contraception, that it actually did include sexual health, and so that we liaised and linked with the sexual health services, and kept up to date very well. I think family planning developed a lot over the last 20 or 30 years. What was available changed, and then you had to retrain. So you'd have to retrain to fit certain IUDs, intrauterine devices, which we call coils. And then you'd have to retrain to insert the little plastic bars, which were containing hormones, which would then release into the bloodstream and act as contraceptive. And so we were kept up to date and progressed into this century with this lovely educative group. And I mean, the number of hours each year that I spent on learning and education and practicing different skills, it was phenomenal. I mean, I normally did twice what was required for the appraisals, but that's because I loved it and I loved general practice. And I think I've probably used up a lot of time now. Why did I retire? Well, I retired because I was 60. And after I retired, I realized that I'd got loads and loads of things on my to-do list still outstanding. And I did not realize that this was part of the head injury I'd had a couple of years before. And this head injury had actually affected my ability. Well, I was tireder than before, which I didn't want to recognize. But looking back, I obviously was. And about 9 p.m, I'd say, oh God, I'm going home, instead of just pushing myself on and doing 1 or 2 more tasks to get them out of the way. So when I left, there was this huge to-do list, and I kept having to come back for days and days and days to, finish it off. These to-do things were not frantically important, but there was something like, I'd promised somebody I'd find a couple of articles on, or I said that I'd find something or other or do something or other. So they were not, frantically important things, but they were on my to-do list at any rate. Hi, Sandra. Hello. Anyway, so that business. And then the other thing was, I really was interested in medicine in other countries. So when I was a student, we had I got interested in Chinese medicine, not the actual medicine, but the actual social setup and how it was run and the clinics and stuff like that. And Médecins Sans Frontières, which was, I would say it's in its infancy. It was much, much smaller procedure and charity than it is now. and Cuba and socialist care, because I believed in care for everybody. I thought that the NHS was the most wonderful thing. I still do, really, even though it's got tremendous difficulties. I think we should all have free healthcare. And poor Cuba, even with no medicine, they still carry on practicing it. One GP there will have 600 patients, and one GP here will have 1,800 to 2,000. So it's a very different kind of setup. And the GP care in Cuba is much, much more personal and about your lifestyle and educative. And they do a lot more physio, hydrotherapy, psychological treatments, because they haven't got drugs because of the embargo from the United States. Anyway, so I'm keeping interested in medicine and people. So what I didn't tell you is when I retired a couple of years later, because I hated retirement, I loathed it, it was boring. A couple of years later, I tried to retrain as a GP, and it really was like doing a new job. And they told me at the end of the year's training and exams that I really couldn't pass as a GP this time. Went to occupational health, walked in, and the guy said, sit down, I know exactly what the problem is. And I'd had that head injury a couple of years ago. Oh yeah, the one moment I didn't wear a helmet on my bicycle, I got knocked off, didn't I? Anyhow, so I went in and he said, I know exactly what the problem is. I've looked at your brain scan, and that point where it bled in your brain is what a GP needs. And you haven't got it anymore. So that accounted for my long appointments with silence. And that silence was me trying to connect what the patient said and what I already knew and come up with a new solution that was going to suit that patient. I couldn't do it. It was just silent. And I didn't know I was being silent. I was just thinking. I didn't realize it. So I couldn't be a GP again. And they said that I could be another kind of doctor in a hospital because they didn't need that bit of the brain so much. So I said, no, I like being a GP. So there we go. Sorry, the sun's moving around so fast.
Oh, thank you very much indeed. That was so interesting. Thank you. Yeah, it must be sad though. The thing you love most, and you know.
I mean, life is so different in retirement. It's not nearly so stimulating and interesting. Oh, I love reading. I mean, especially on Sundays, I would get my British Medical Journal out and I would read it. And then within 2 or 3 weeks, something had been useful.
Yeah. Reading the Sunday papers doesn't really come up with the same buzz, does it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but does anyone want to ask Hattie anything?
Am I what?
Anyone like to ask Hattie anything?
Yes, can you hear me, Hattie?
Yes, Sandra.
Hello, how are you today, darling?
Yeah.
All right. I'm still in agony with my back. Just want to thank you very much for putting the leaflet through the door, the get up and go. It's okay to say it, but I can't do it. It's taken me till now, which is about 10 to 12, to get up, washed, dressed, get downstairs, and able to, well, I have been listening to you up in bed actually, but this nerve that's supposed to be trapped is unbelievable. The pain going down my left leg, terrible every time I put my foot to the ground. It's like a sharp needle going right through my buttocks. It's horrible. I hate it. So help me. I know you probably can't. It's just that I've got to wait for it to be released. But my God.
And this is the kind of thing that, you know, friends of mine do have a chat with me about medical conditions, and I love it. And obviously I'm not up to date with medicine anymore in these last 10 years.
Oh, but I think you are.
But I still think that the personal touch and the exploration of what might be going on can be quite helpful, really. And I all my medical career, I've thought there's 2 people in the room, 2 specialists. There's you and the doctor. You've got different specialisms. You know what's going on in your life. You've been living with yourself all the time. I'm there for a few minutes. I can just give some advice if it suits. And yeah.
It's lovely to have you anyway, even as a friend. I'm so honoured to have you as a friend. It's lovely. And all the games of Scrabble and cards and everything that we play.
You have to keep the brain going.
Sorry?
Have to keep the brain going.
Yes, absolutely. And anyway, Hattie, whenever you're passing, please pop in and see me. And thank you for the talk was lovely.
Dropping in to see me.
Sorry?
Thanks for dropping in to see me here.
Well, but I can't come in and see you at the moment, but as soon as you can, I will. And if you're passing, well, the door's always open to you. Thank you so much. And thanks for being my friend.
Okay, lovely. Thank you.
It sounds like you must have missed the beginning part of Hattie's talk, but you can still catch it online. Yes,
I did miss the beginning because I was still in bed, which is sad.
Yes, but you can still
catch it up, can I?
Yes, you can. Yes. Would you be able to send her the link, Hattie, or shall I? I haven't got your email.
My email. My email or Hattie's email?
Sandra.
Sandra,
thank you. Sorry. Yeah.
Patsy, shall I send you Sandra's email? And then
then I can send it to you. Yes, I'll do that. Yes.
Oh, thank you.
You can also then look at our previous talks because we've got we're in our third year now, so we've got quite a lot of talks that you can look at.
I missed a lot, but that would be lovely if you could. Thank you very much. That would be great. Thank you.
It's quite a resource.
Yes. We haven't met, have we?
I don't think so.
No. I don't think we have. But thank you anyway. That would be nice if you could do that. That would be great.
So I would like you to explore with me any experiences of the changes of healthcare that you've had over the years that you think, and what you think about them.
What, myself?
Yeah, look, you see, David and Christopher.
Yeah, right. Yes, definitely. Oh, I could do a lot of that.
We have David first, though. David, what was your?
Well, on that topic, I grew up in a little town in Kent, and my father was the local manager of Boots, retail pharmacist. So we knew all the doctors, and the doctors. Visits were very personal, and it's I mean, I hardly ever went to a surgery. Doctors would come and see us. And these days I'm in a Montpellier clinic, and you almost have to fight your way over there to get an appointment. You have to go and visit to book an appointment because the phones don't work very well, and so on. So it's not as personal. It doesn't feel as tailored as I would like. So I'm recovering from an operation a couple of years ago, and I'm getting some help with nutrition and exercise, but not really. And I wonder if you've got any thoughts. You were mentioning the ratio of patients to doctors in Cuba, and I wonder if it seems that the NHS is in distress itself, in distress at the moment. But I'm wondering if you see the potential for things to improve in future, and what that might look like as far as both patients and doctors are concerned.
I think the way they've tried to make it improve is by increasing the number of nurses and nurse practitioners, because nurse practitioners were hardly heard of when we first employed one in, I don't know when it was. It must have been in the 2000s that we employed our first nurse practitioner, and they have had quite specialist training, and it takes quite a long time to train them. And I think part of what the government's tried to do is to increase the number of less specialised people who can then hopefully recognise when they're at their limit of knowledge and refer up, and in that way make care more accessible. There are some problems with that because, you know, people who are lesser trained take sometimes 3 times as long as a consultation by a GP, and the GP comes to conclusions much quicker. But on the other hand, they're paid a lot more. And so I do think there's a big issue about finances. They reduced the NHS pension, for instance, as one way of trying to save money. And the way it's calculated is different now than it was. My pension is absolutely huge. I've got far too much to live on. Ridiculous. But then I am a single person. I haven't got any dependents. So, you know, to think that as a single person I need that much money is the wrong way of thinking. Anyway, that's another question, how to do it politically, how to arrange it politically. But I think you have to ask what you can do for yourself to support yourself and how to motivate yourself. As you say, you haven't had particularly good support. And, you know, I think it's partly because you're asking for a specialist support from people who are non-specialists. What else to say, David? But I mean, have you been given tips on how you can help yourself between appointments? Obviously, I suppose you have.
Yeah, a little, but you know, if I can't get it at the clinic and I'm supposed to be helping myself, I'm possibly the least knowledgeable. You know, we're not yet at the stage where Dr. Google can tell us everything we need to know, or where you have, I think in the future you will have artificial intelligence systems that are really tracking you quite closely and able to help, but we're not there yet. And I just getting into that, I think that's possible something for the future. And also just to mention to your friends, when we're recording this, we'll put it on YouTube. I give Patsy the address, and if you look at the notes under the video, you'll be able to see both a link to all the other talks we've done as a playlist, but also links to Patsy's talk, to Hattie's. Sorry, I'm mixing Patsy and Hattie up today. You'll be able to see Hattie's other talks and click through to them.
So David, that's the sort of thing that I find I'm talking to my friends about, is you might call it micromanagement of how they are and what to do next. And you know, the other day a friend said, do you think it's okay to me to take 3 a day of these? And then I'm thinking with my old knowledge and saying, well, yes, it is. Let me have a look. How many calories in here? Okay, it's only 200 calories in each. So I'm kind of making known the kind of questions that I'm asking in order to make some of these decisions. And then, I mean, this particular person is absolutely has lost inordinate amounts of weight, and he does look like he's out of Belsen. And there's something called refeeding syndrome. But thank God I just read about it a couple of weeks before my dad got it. Otherwise, I would not have known why he was puffy and why he was short of breath, why he was itchy all over. It was because of refeeding. So I seen that with my dad, because he was getting Alzheimer's and he dementia. So he wasn't really able to feed himself enough. And this guy, I'm concerned about refeeding syndrome from him. And probably none of the doctors who are looking after him, because he's on a surgical ward, probably none of the doctors who are looking after him have ever heard of it. And so I think a general practitioner, I've got a lot of breadth of knowledge and ways of thinking, I think. And I guess that's why I enjoy helping my friends to solve their problems, because it's thinking, it's a challenge, it's exploring and what might happen if.
Shall we have mine? I was remembering the good old days when I was a child, and if you wanted to see the doctor, you just went and you sat in the waiting room for an hour or so until you could be seen. And I think I can remember it because I didn't become a 7-stone weekly until my late 20s, and as a child, you know, with all these other lads who were, you know, and I wanted to know what could be done, and my grandmother took me to the doctor. We were waiting there an hour. I misunderstood one of the questions. I'm not sure it would have made any difference, but it's funny how you remember that when, oh, that's what he meant, some years later. And I think he prescribed Guinness. So my father bought some, and I think I took one sip and said, I'm not drinking this, it's disgusting. And that was the end of that. So you never know. I might have, grown up difference if I'd stuck to my Guinness. But and I must admit, the practice I was at when I was in Easton, they were very good, but she in particular was always running behind time.
Like me.
Because she gave you more time than, was allocated for it. And since I've been over here, I've been stunned at the number of pills there are for all sorts of different things, It's fascinating, but I must admit, I don't find the appointment thing that difficult. I think it's just playing the system, you've got to phone at a particular time of the day. The receptionist is going to be kind of triaging you, so you sound a bit more pathetic or a bit, and of course nowadays with telephone appointments, you can get quite, a lot done that way. Touch wood, I'm quite happy at present, but I think I'm less happy with the way so much of it is being privatized. I'm having a cataract operation on Monday, and that's at a private place. I had to, well, no, actually a friend paid for me to have my ears syringed recently, and that was done at my pharmacy. I think very good, and I do like the fact that I can get my jabs there, because I always hate, well, I don't like being in a room with lots of other people, but queuing up for my flu jab or whatever, I'm being really more worried than I need to be that I'm going to miss it when they call out my name. But anyway, right, I'll stop wittering on because we've only got a few minutes left, and there may be somebody else who wants to say something.
Brett, you've got lots of experience.
Yes, I mean I am diabetic, and the treatment has changed enormously over the last 60 or 70 years. General public understanding has improved incredibly. I'm not so sure about some of the people, some of the specialists I've seen still seem to have very, I don't know, have a different understanding from myself. And I think part of the problem is that some people listening to you will not take seriously anything that doesn't agree with their textbook. But what you're saying won't get into the textbook unless somebody does listen and thinks, oh yes, a significant proportion of my patients have this problem or this understanding, and maybe we should look into it. So yeah, I think
Brett, I mean, you may have seen recently, I don't know if you ever look at the Zoe studies or the Zoe, because they, people are realizing and talk about it, especially nutritionists, clinical nutritionists, realizing how different foods are absorbed differently according to how they're cooked and treated. If you look on a packet of almonds, you'll just see the calories per almond or per 100 grams, whether it's ground almond or whether it's whole almonds. Actually, of course, what's available to your body is absolutely different according to how the food has been treated. And now we are beginning to recognize that. And the complexity of immunology, gut immunology and gut flora on absorption of foods. And I mean, sadly, you've been somebody who has had enormous variation in your sugar levels. And, you know, it must be due to something. It's not due to you choosing food according to their rules and according to time, because you do that extremely well. It is due to somewhat else.
I put it down to creativity, which is another way of saying mental stress. That my mental state affects my blood sugars quite a lot. Also, cycling to Kingsbridge and back does as well. But
yes, I was. Oh, sorry.
Graham. Yeah.
Unmute yourself, Graham.
Thank you, Hattie. I wanted you to say something about the relationship between lifestyle and health. To what extent, during your service as a GP, did you treat patients who, if only they had had a more suitable diet and adequate exercise and so on, would not have come to you with the complaint they had?
Yeah, I mean, that is interesting you say that, because of course we do know about the links, but we used to observe how much of our patient consultations were either extremely influenced or purely about psychological stuff, and how people felt and how they were managing and organizing and maintaining their self-esteem and things like that. So we used to notice that tremendously. Then, as you say, this emphasis on lifestyle, because the obesity epidemic has happened, you can see that adding to smoking. Now, Charles Fletcher was the first TV doctor, and he was a respiratory physician in London. And he was hammering on about cigarettes being bad for us for yonks. And gradually, the government has got the message. Well, why didn't they get the message? Because of finances, because the British Tobacco Association was very influential and paid a lot of tax and, you know, had the government by the short and curlies, really. Anyhow, so now we do know smoking's bad for you. And now we know that obesity is absolutely terrible. And obesity is generated by food companies who mix foods in such a way that you want some more. And it's not only the problem of the person who's putting it in their mouths, it's the problem of what they're putting in the mouths. So I agree with you that lifestyle, in quotes, has got a hell of a lot to contribute. It contributes a hell of a lot to our illness packages. As you heard on the radio during this week, it is thought that 40% of Alzheimer's could be attributable to lifestyle, and people are just not changing their lifestyles because it's not in their remit for one reason or another. It's a huge influencer. Heart disease went down when smoking went down. You can see it in the figures. Can't hear you, Graham.
Why did you study A-level music, and what difference does it make to your leisure time?
I have lost all sound.
I didn't get that.
We can't hear you, Graham.
Just too quiet.
The question was to Hattie, why did you study A-level music? What difference has it made to your leisure time activities?
Oh, I studied A-level music. At school, I did O-level music and played quite a lot of music, and you know, played in musicals, danced and things like that. And I think it was very nourishing. And then when I went from one GP practice with a gap and then to the other practice, during that gap, I needed mental space because I'd had a marital breakup, and needed to process all that. And I thought, right, well, what can I do that's productive during this year and that I really love? And I did an OU course in the basics of music, because I could do that anytime. It was very flexible around continuing work as a locum and family planning. And then the following year, I thought, well, I want to get settled somewhere else. I'll move to Bristol. So I came down, stayed with my dad. What am I going to do? I need to establish myself in the medical scene, find out about it. And I did an A-level in music. I did the second half of a diploma in counselling, and I was doing GP locums and family planning locums, actually hospital locums as well, but at a lower grade. And that was eye-opening. I mean, when you haven't done hospital work for 20 odd years and you suddenly go back into hospital at a lower grade, what I found was that people at even lower grades were doing stuff that I used to do as a registrar. I mean, all the kind of the calculations of intricate little doses for this, that, and the other to improve kidney function with a drip and this, that, and the other were being done by the juniors. And before, it used to be done by the registrars. And it was just phenomenal how, you know, stuff that had been newly introduced just got to be commonplace, and the junior staff could then practice it. So what did music do for me? Well, I think it's given me the solid belief that people are themselves and I'm only in their lives for 10 minutes. You know, they are sorting themselves out. They have got to find their own resources, like music, joy in film, or creativity. Brett, you know heaps about creativity, because it is so nourishing for people. And that, you know, I'm only popping in for a few minutes as a GP to try to help them on their way, and that's their way. So I think music has kept me grounded, if you like to say that.
I did hear a very interesting interview on the radio, and it was a woman whose father or grandfather, in his last few weeks of life, started telling her about himself and the things he'd been through. And she realized how important that was to people, and has set up an organization whose name I can't remember, I'm afraid, to get younger people to talk to older people and find out about their life experiences and so on. Because, you know, my generation has been through incredible changes in the way things are done, and generations before and after probably as well. The rate of change in our society is much faster now than it was 50 years ago, and so on. Anyway, I'll shut up because I do enjoy burbling.
Good point, Brett.
Have a good burble, it'll do you good.
I did train to become a STEM ambassador for a year and a couple of years, and that's science, technology, engineering, and medicine. And that the idea behind being a STEM ambassador is that you talk to younger people and let them pick your brains about the area of the area of work that you did, to give them a human aspect of it, really. And I did enjoy that. I mean, it was I didn't do it for very long for various reasons, but you know, it certainly was an aim, a goal that I wanted to do, and I still enjoy doing it, talking to younger people about what it was like to be in full-time work. And full-time work as a GP was about 72 hours a week. And then I was 3/4 time, and I think it was about 52. And then I was half time, and I think it was about 49. And that doesn't kind of add up. So the NHS gets much more out of a half timer than they do, you know, from two half timers than they do from one full timer. Mary, have you got anything to say, or are you not there now? Hello.
Yes, I am here, Hattie. My God, what a full life. I was interested when you said retirement was boring, because in a way it opens every door there is. So I'm thinking, how am I going to summarize this for Zuri? I think she better just listen on her own.
Yeah.
Yes. I do wonder if it's something about medicine, because a doctor who used to attend at Bedminster meeting, who lives around the corner from me, who I've known for years, and you know, he was very surprised that what I did for a living, I don't keep up with it. I mean, I hated it towards the end, so I'm definitely not going to, you know, have anything to do with it in my retirement. But I mean, he still reads the Lancet every week, and I think there must be something about what medicine does to your brain that keeps people interested. I'll have to try and find out amongst a few other people who I know who are retired GPs and see if they.
For me, it ticked a lot of boxes: new intellectual knowledge, reading, human contact, continuity. As a GP, I've got continuity with my patients. The other career option I liked was rheumatology, because you would have them coming back to the same rheumatology clinic and you would have continuity over time. And I like that as another option. And kidney disease, the renal disease, if they were on dialysis or they were making, you were trying to avoid them going on dialysis or trying to avoid having to have a kidney transplant, you would see the same patients. And I really enjoyed that. And that was a key factor going into general practice, was the human factor, and reading and translating intellectual knowledge and research and look-sees into a real life situation, that kind of problem solving.
Right. Well, I think we probably ought to bring this to a close, because it's only gone on for a quarter of an hour longer than we're supposed to. So thank you very much, Hattie. Very interesting and told in a very entertaining way. So I'm now scratching my brain trying to think of something else we can ask you to talk about. So
well, you're going to have, or maybe did you have Mark Gill the other day?
We did. That was
I missed that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, you should have a look. It's good.
Good.
Yeah. And next week we have Graham Davey talking about Hilda Cashmore. Which
sorry everyone, I have to leave the meeting. Right. Thank you. Thank you for your help.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye for now, Sandra.
Bye. Thank you. I'll call you later. Bye bye.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's all right. Sorry. No, I was.
When we hear Graham, is it possible for the sound to be more audible?
Yes, I shall wear a headset with a microphone in front of my mouth, so there should be no problem.
And thanks. When you do talk nearer the microphone, it's much better. Yeah.
Okay. So, right. Thank you all for coming, and hopefully see you all soon.
Yeah. Thank you, Hattie.
Oh, you're welcome. Lovely.